Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Today is Sunday, June 8th, and it's not as sunny as our previous Sundays, a little overcast, but we are certainly happy to be here for the Lady Liberty League. I want to thank everyone who is tuning in today or who will tune in later on. I am Sue Durichko, one of the co-founders, along with Tom Early and Laura Hudak. And the Lady Liberty League is a platform in which we encourage and try to facilitate verified sources of trusted information on issues that impact us daily. I'm going to give some brief ground rules. If you have questions while we're listening to our guest speaker, please put them in the chat and we will make sure that they get to our guest speaker before the end of the call. Today, we're going to talk about the impact of the policies of the Trump administration on public education through the eyes of a local school board member. And I would, and I'd love to have the honor of introducing that school board member. His name is Evan Botzki, and Evan serves on the Euclid Board of Education, where he was elected on November 7th of 2023. Becoming the youngest member in the board's history at just 22 years old, he currently holds the legislative liaison position, providing monthly updates to the board on key legislation and related policy matters. Beyond his work on the board, Botsky is deeply engaged in civic and community life. He serves as second in command at both the Euclid Historical Society and Museum and the Cuyahoga branch of the youth-led Future Forward Alliance. From 2023 to 2024, he also held the role of vice chairman on Euclid's Charter Review Commission. Botsky's commitment to public service began early. While still in high school, he collaborated with Harrison McCrate to design the official flag of the city of Euclid, which was unanimously adopted in 2018. Sorry, I am letting people in as I'm going over the bio, so I apologize for my distraction. Um, Botsky is a Euclid High School graduate of 2019, and he earned a Bachelor's of Science in Public Administration from George Mason University. He's currently pursuing a Master's of Public Administration at Kent State University. And we are excited to hear your presentation today. So I would welcome you to go ahead and take the stage.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I
You're
just want to say,
welcome.
even though it is a bit of, a more gray day, it's always a bright day being around such friendly faces. So I just want to first just say thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I'm really excited to get into this. Uh,
Great.
yeah. So, kind of just to start, education, as we currently know it, I kind of divide it into three sections based on kind of three sections of government with the federal, the state, and the local. A lot of people like to kind of get into the weeds with federal government just because it's what's hip, it's what's hot, it's what everybody can talk about. But truly with education, a lot of what you're seeing on the local level is going to be decided at the state and with your local school boards. Um, but that isn't to say that the federal government doesn't have influence on state policy and on local policy. So I'll kind of just start with that, with kind of it's hard to avoid this cloud of MAGA and with
Mhm.
Trumpism and its effects on different people in different ways. I mean, kind of just starting, I mean, you can see it with our vice president, for example, where he once was somebody that was adamantly against Donald Trump and now obviously serves as his second in command. So you can kind of see just how far-reaching that influence can be. And that, of course, extends into education. Obviously, President Trump has started to dismantle the Department of Education alongside Secretary McMahon. And I'll start by saying, obviously, a lot of people are going to be interested to hear on how that could affect local school boards. But the truth of the matter is, right now, because it's so recent, is we really don't know the full extent of it just yet. We have to sit here and we kind of just have to see what all they're wanting to do, where they're wanting to pick apart certain things. I mean, obviously, we have a lot of ideas on what they might want to do based on what they've said with in terms of areas like DEI or trying to defund certain grants or all those sort of things. But really we don't have the full idea yet. We don't know where it's going to be. That isn't to say it's not going to affect districts like Euclid. But it's just these things take time, which can be both fortunate in allowing us to kind of brace ourselves for impact, so to speak, but can also be unfortunate in that when, as local representatives for our cities, we want to be able to answer questions and say, this is what's going to happen. This is how you will be affected. This is how you won't be affected. And that's just the unfortunate part right now is for a lot of these sorts of things, we don't know the full extent. And so there's areas like that where we're in the same boat as everybody else, but even more stressed because we're trying to think of how can we manage this and how can we make this as smooth as possible and more importantly as safe as possible for everybody that we have under our care. Um, but I was starting to talk about kind of the influence that the federal policy can hold over our state and local governments. And I'll say, as a legislative liaison, as was mentioned, I provide monthly updates on legislation and different goings on of state government. And so one of the big ways that that has kind of been manifesting has been through this war, so to speak, on diversity, equity, and inclusion programming and just the idea of being equitable and inclusive. That's kind of manifested in recently introduced legislation seeking to ban DEI from local school districts, which is really interesting, so to speak, because when you look at the legislation, it's so vague as to what
Mhm.
constitutes as DEI. And that's kind of circling back to what I was just saying, where it's we don't know a lot of the impacts of these things. We don't know how we are supposed to implement state laws, and we don't know how we're supposed to implement all these different things. And it's made especially difficult with these very vague notions or pieces of legislations or just general ideas that are thrown out there from powerful people.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's kind of one of the biggest influences of Trump that is sometimes discounted is this throwing things at the wall, not fully formulated ideas, but just saying, well, we don't like this thing. We don't like this, not even just disliking this thing. We don't like this concept of this thing, I
Mhm.
guess, which has, of course, been alluded to with in President Trump's debate styles with uh, concepts of a plan, and that's kind of even seen again down to the state level where we're introducing policies to ban something and not fully going forward with what that idea is. And so it makes it difficult for us at the local level to follow these laws. And a more malicious or more not malicious, but cynical, I guess, interpretation of it is that that might be the point, is to kind of pigeonhole people that disagree with this kind of opposition and just saying, well, let's do, I guess this is how we're going to interpret it. And then being told, no, actually, you're wrong with how you interpreted that. And so now we can do even more to mess with you. And so that's one, I suppose, cynical interpretation of it. But I guess another interpretation of it is that they don't even know what they're seeking to ban and what they're seeking to get rid of. I mean, like, and I think that's kind of a lot of people are scared right now of, they're trying to come after all these different ideas and these different sources of inclusion. I mean, I think one of the biggest sources of inclusion, are public libraries because they are open to everybody and you can get anything you want. And I believe I saw something with the budget, which of course is yet to be finalized yet, but talking about wanting to censor provocative or other sorts of ideas, such as like sexual orientation or generally explicit content, um, which I find rather confusing to be included in a budget. But again, I'm not working on it, so I suppose
Mhm.
what do I know there? Um, but it's just these sorts of general targeting that's are very concerning. And it makes it hard for us at the local level to ensure smooth layouts of plans and ensuring smooth layouts of how we want to go about um, with education and
Mhm.
with just general policies, because it's like with the Euclid schools, and I can say this very confidently, both as a school board member and as an alumni, the Euclid schools will always value education first and foremost. We are not a place that is like, we're not, even though we tend to lean more liberal, we're not like this radical thing. We're not getting rid of mathematics. We're not getting rid of English lessons. We're not getting rid of any of that sort of stuff that you might hear propagandized about with liberal cities or liberal regions. I'm very proud of the education I received from the Euclid schools. It saved me money, in fact. I was able to attend George Mason University in Virginia, as was mentioned, and because of the education I received at the Euclid schools, I was able to graduate a whole year early, which saved me quite a lot of money and which has allowed me to then further invest back into myself. And so when we're talking about getting rid of like trying to strip down public education, that's a thing that we might be taking away from our children, isn't like the supposed indoctrination that is going on, but rather we could be getting rid of very real opportunities for people across any spectrum, whether that is your race, your background, your sexuality, your gender, it doesn't matter. These are very real opportunities that could be getting stripped away as we look at opposition to public education. I mentioned the budget. I'll kind of get into that a bit. As it stands currently, I can't remember the exact number that's, yeah,
May I inject in,
yes.
Evan? Before you move on to the budget, just give a little bit of foundation for anyone who may be listening. In your specific school district, you provide educational opportunity for approximately 6,300 students, correct?
Yes, so that number actually has decreased in recent years. I think pretty soon, if my memory is serving me properly, we might actually be down 2,000 from that number.
Okay.
Um, and that
So
actually, yeah.
4,300. Yeah, and maybe you can help with a little more distinction too. With those 4,300 students,
Mhm,
the demographic or the breakdown, it's predominantly Black or brown students who are at 63.52 is the stat that I pulled off the internet percent to the second highest, which is Caucasian at
mhm.
29.48. And then, smaller breakdowns of other that come beyond that. And, you did touch on some really good points when you brought up DEI and some of these intentionally vague policies of the Trump administration, including the potential attack on these library systems and the censorship and the attempted censorship of materials in our public libraries. And I know that that's pretty layered and nuanced, but I say all of that to say, do you get the sense that a school system in a more urban location, like in Euclid, that has a minority majority in their student body, do you feel like your students or your community is being targeted in any kind of a way, and that your resource that you depended upon historically is at risk, such as and I did pull a stat that you at the Euclid schools, you provide meals, breakfast and lunches for students from pre-K all the way through 12th grade. Um, you know, s- and I bring that up too because it's, resources that are basic fundamental needs according to Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, when you pull that away from these students, what's the impact?
Yeah, so that's a great question because as has been mentioned, Euclid is a majority minority school district.
Mhm.
And surrounding that with Euclid is it is a working class neighborhood, and we often find that with similar districts to Euclid. And what that means is that we are more dependent on um state funding and things
Mhm.
along that nature because Euclid, so I'll actually touch very specifically on Euclid here, in that we are a unique community among every school district in the state of Ohio, in that we have a shared income tax with the city, which is to say that we receive funding from both property tax and income tax. Um, Now, where that comes in, though, which like at first that might be, oh wow, that's great. That's a lot of funding for the schools. And obviously I don't mean to sound like ingrateful, or ungrateful, but we are the problem with that then though is you have to remember we're a working class community. So
Mhm.
the money that's coming from that is substantially less than you might expect. And so then we have to rely on state funding and other grants that we can get. And to your point of those resources getting stripped away and the like, is that it is a very real possibility because the more that the state kind of strips away from public education and their budget, the more students at Euclid are going to suffer. And, then we're going to have
Mhm.
to take away more programs. Like I said, very real opportunities, tangible opportunities. I know recently we had to. Um, Remove a career tech program, a landscaping program. And it was one that I thought had a lot of very real merit to it because, as we know, not everybody is going to go to into higher education. Not everybody's going to go to a college or a university or even a community college. And so there, as school districts, a thing that I think is a great opportunity we can provide is through these career tech programs or these college credit plus programs. Um, in that they allow students to get very real experience or gain knowledge they might not otherwise get. And that's something that I felt this landscaping program provided,
Mhm.
because what it would do is it would allow students to go around the neighborhood or around the city and, perform landscaping,
Mhm.
which, is a very real career path, and people can really make a life for themselves out of that without having to have any higher advanced education in it. And it's a skilled task. But
And
unfortunately, due to where our budget was, it was a program we had to cut. And that's kind of just the reality of where we are with public education right now, is that we're not able to look at, oh, what can we add? It's okay, what do we have to get rid of? And it is a really painful process.
And if I can inject in, and that's excellent background and foundation that you gave on your career tax. Thank you for that because it's hugely important. But I want to comment on the unique structure that you have in funding Euclid schools, which is your shared income and property tax um, structure that you have. And I hear you that you are not ungrateful. And I understand that it is very much a working class community, but think about the potential from having landscaping in the career tech, not just for that individual who college may not be in their path in the future. And, the landscaping career tech program giving them a great opportunity to have meaningful and gainful, satisfying employment, but also the community benefit when somebody from Euclid goes through that programming and some of those funds are not in the city budget to improve or beautify. It does create a pathway for these individuals then to utilize their landscaping skills and their ability and their companies to help with that piece of it to benefit all of the community. And just a little more background, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when I did some research on Euclid schools, you guys at some point offered 22 career technical programs, which is a very important piece. especially in a working class community. I am a product of career tech. That is where I earned my nursing degree from. And it's what has given my family and myself the ability to have a life where we have a sustainable budget and household, and we're able to achieve and do the things that we like to do or have as a family. And to pull that out from somebody's opportunity, or many 4,300 students from their opportunity as they enter into Euclid High School, that's very disturbing.
Yes. No,
Mhm.
I completely agree. I mean, one of the a program we had to cut was the a little while ago, I believe last year. It was more due to lack of interest, but we had to cut the firefighting program,
Oh.
which I particularly felt an attachment to because of the fact that my father is a retired firefighter.
Mhm.
And like you said, like these are programs that are building kids into like real just strong citizens.
Mhm.
Like, we're teaching them core values. And again, it's just like having to fight this funding problem. It's really it's an ache to not just Euclid, but to the state. Because you can take, it doesn't matter where you're from. Um, it really ends up mattering where you end up. And a kid from Euclid can end up in, Dayton or Worcester or Youngstown, and the skills they learned there can really build up the community. And the reverse is true. Kids from those communities can come into Euclid and build up those areas, and they're able to do that through their education. And it's why
Mhm.
funding education and funding these types of programs is so pivotal.
And at the
And
end of the
yeah,
day, it's about producing or equipping these students to be productive members of society, no matter, like you said, where they land or who comes in to your community or mine. When they win, the community wins. When they're
exactly.
empowered, the community succeeds. When they bring a certain skill set and educational value to their community, we can thrive. And I want to just segue a little bit to, I'm going to go redirect back to the Trump administration, and they continue to promote school vouchers and charter school expansion. How might that impact enrollment, funding, and equity in Euclid Public Schools?
So that is a great question, and honestly, I consider it, and I'm going to sound a little dramatic, and maybe I am just a little bit, but it is coming from a very real place. I
Passionate,
feel like it
passionate, not
is,
dramatic.
yes,
Yes.
yes, I do
Okay.
feel that this I will say this, if you want to send your child to a private or religious school or anything of that sort, I don't have anything against that. I want to make that clear. I think that, I think having options is a very good thing. However, I think the problem comes in when that we as the public start funding these options and it comes at the expense of our public schools. And Euclid feels this impact quite heavily. I want to take you on a quick little thing that I learned recently. So Euclid just adopted a policy of open enrollment, which for those unfamiliar means that anyone from anywhere can attend the Euclid schools so long as they enroll and they can get themselves to the school. Um, and this is kind of Ohio has adopted this idea of school choice, the idea that parents can choose where they want their children to get educated. And so if that's the ideology we're working under, then let's work under it fairly. A thing you might not know is that when a student open enrolls to private/charter school, um, they receive a certain amount of money towards their education for that school. Now, as I mentioned, um, Euclid just adopted an open enrollment policy. And so you would think that that same amount of money would go towards that student's education at a public school, but that is not the case. And this is something that I have noted to my personal state representative and state senator Eric Sonnenberg and Ken Smith, respectively. And Unfortunately, I don't know if this will get remedied this time around, but I think that's a very real issue because if we're operating under this idea of school choice, if I am choosing to send my student to a public school, they should receive the same benefit if I sent them to any other school. And so I think that's a very real issue. And then the other problem with this increasing funding of charters and private schools at the expense of public schools is, again, there is a very real expense. We see ourselves losing funding because we're seeing a declining enrollment. And the when you reach a certain amount of students, you get a certain amount of funding. But if we are luring away students from public schools into these other locations, then there's a gap here on what's going
Mhm.
on and the ability for our public schools to function. Because like I said, I don't necessarily have a problem with choosing to send your child somewhere else. That's your right. Um, but here's the thing about these schools is that they don't have the same level of oversight as public schools do. And not everybody can has the ability to get to these other schools if they aren't nearby. And so that's why having public schools is so important, so that if anything were to, God forbid, happen to these private charter schools, then there is always an ensured reinforcement that there will be a strong educational backbone in your city by you. And so that's a concern of mine is we need to make sure we have places for everybody to go if they so choose. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with my concerns with continuing to fund this venture.
Yes, duly noted, and definitely a shared concern. And for me, as a city councilwoman, as a nurse, as a mother, all of those roles that I play in my life, my concern is when we decimate our public school system, how do we attract or draw in new and young couples who will bring with them that promise of a tomorrow for our community
Hmm.
and a stronghold, a thread, if you will, that will, tie in the folks who are reaching their mature years and going down a different path in life and that new generation to continue a community and the work and that legacy. And, this definitely is a threat.
Absolutely. And that's kind of a broader point too, is I consider education the backbone of a community at large. I think you have
Mhm.
your education and you have your institutions and everything is built around them. Because like you said, if you're a young couple and you're looking to move somewhere, one of the first things you're looking at is what's the best education I can get for my child? And another thing you're looking at there, though, because let's say hypothetically, Euclid had the best education in the state and you want to move there. But let's also say we're operating under this model we're in where we're considering not funding public education enough. And so that means that communities like Euclid have to increase their own local taxes. Well, and this might be controversial for me to say as somebody that's more liberal. I don't particularly like paying taxes. I like having my money. And so if local areas have to increase their taxes, to help fund education, the quality does not matter if you don't feel you want to, either you can't or you don't want to afford the taxes that go with that. And so that's another problem with um taking away state funding of education is it hurts communities at large. It's not just
Mhm.
hurting public education because you can be the most ardent supporter of private schooling and you can say, I'm going to send my child to private school and this is what I want to do. But, you'd want to then move from a city if it's like, well, now my taxes are going up again. And
Yes.
that affects everybody, whether or not you send somebody to or send your child to a public school or not, your taxes are your taxes. And you can of course vote no on levies, but regardless, you're going to deal with these taxes.
Well, and I could speak to, I am a product of private schools. I went to Catholic school from preschool through 12th grade. And so I align with yes, and I appreciate yes, your disclaimer that you're not against faith-based education. You're just against it if it's at the detriment to the public education institution. And um, I can say we could do a whole nother call and invite in State Senator Kent Smith and House Rep Eric Sonnenberg and talk about the constitutionality of how our schools are funded in Ohio and how they were ruled unconstitutional and how that would directly feed into some of that relief on the burden of the property owners and in your case, the workers and some of those monies that should be going to other things in Euclid, such as roads and parks and any of your recreational opportunities, safety services, of course, I would never, dismiss that police, fire, and your service crews. But that's a whole nother conversation
Indeed.
for another guest. But I definitely hear what you're saying. And I want to believe it's not that you don't believe in paying your taxes, but appropriating them fairly so they work for us and not against us, and so that they're
Absolutely.
reasonable and not unreasonable, so that you
Yes.
still have enough money at the end of the day to buy the things you need and sustain your life, your lifestyle and your family needs.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just to that point real quick, because and that's the thing that as a local official I care the most about is I care that everybody is having a fair chance at the life they want to live. And I think
Mhm.
that should be our goal is making sure that things are as affordable as possible for everyone. And and it's even though I'm a school board member and my focus is obviously making sure the schools are running properly, it like I said, it affects everything. Like all these issues are so intertwined and so making sure that schools are funded properly, make sure that, your living expenses in a roundabout way are affordable. And so these are all connected issues. And at the end of the day, that's what I care about is everyone living the life they want to.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, correct?
Absolutely.
The American
Absolutely.
dream.
Yes.
So when it comes to the Trump administration and some of these plans that have definitely become a reality, according to the, what is it, 900-page Project 2025
Yes.
put forth by the Heritage Foundation. There are so many nuanced agendas, including public education, that have been under attack even prior to the second term of Trump and the presidency. And there has been quite a bit of obvious now looking back infiltration at the state level on some of these policies that do impact local funding and ability. You referenced DEI, and I do want to go back to it and maybe get your real world impact and perspective on how it impacts students in Euclid, and how it have you had to respond to any of those local consequences from federal level changes in civil rights enforcement in schools?
Right. So that's one of the things that I mentioned earlier is that might be the biggest thing we're trying to keep an eye out on and how it affects us. And it's something that, we have our treasurer looking at, we have our superintendent looking at, we have, all levels of the district looking at and how do we have to adjust this? Because like I said, we've never been a district that's like, oh, we need to do all these newfangled liberal ideas.
Mhm,
But like again, when you're not clearly defining what is diversity, equity, and inclusion,
mhm,
we don't know how we're supposed to change operations. And like I said, it's to the point where it is like, is this meant to be intentionally confusing?
mhm,
And I hate to be like that sort of cynical idea and like paranoid, if you will.
mhm,
But it's just like when you we look as each level of government looks up, each of those leaders look up to each other. And so it's like, even though, I wouldn't consider myself a supporter of the current state or federal government, it's like we as local officials need guidance. We need to know, well, what are you expecting of us? And when that guidance is not clearly given, it makes our lives a lot more difficult. It makes that pursuit of happiness incredibly difficult for everyone, especially working class families, the likes of which are found in Euclid.
And you bring up an excellent point, because I think that we could all sometimes narrow our concern by avoiding being labeled as paranoid or conspiracy or tinfoil hat, people are hair on fire. But I want to make the distinction that, you are clearly an intelligent and you're obviously an educated public servant who is serving your community. And, when do we assert ourselves as reasonably concerned based on the evidence that's being manifested in front of us and shut off that narrative or that propaganda that wants to label us as paranoid or conspiracy theorists. When it comes to censoring materials in our public library, when it comes to that intentional vague policy that bans DEI and how it impacts, a school district like yours that, like I referenced, you have 63% of your enrollment are Black and Brown people.
Mhm.
Um, these are things that will have a direct impact. You said that, your community is a working class community. Those free lunches and free breakfasts are super important to your student base. And then also, I want to bring in, do you have concerns locally about the Trump administration and how and again, they may roll back protections for LGBTQ plus students, and students with disabilities or English learners. And those are three categories that are extremely vulnerable currently under the Trump administration. And, June is Pride Month. And I think it's really important to talk about those things and how these policies have a negative impact on stigmatizing some of these individuals and putting them at a safety risk too, not just in school, but in the larger community.
Right, and so I'll start with you mentioned like when is it appropriate to be concerned and when can we feel that we're allowed to voice our opinions and our concerns? And I think the answer to that truly it's just a core of American society is I don't think it's ever too early to be concerned and I don't think it's ever too early to express those concerns. And I think this is the point of a democratic society is we elect people and we call them representatives. We call them our elected representatives because they are meant to hear our concerns and are meant to represent them into where they're going. A thing that I pride myself on an elected official is I try to make my availability very clear for everyone in the city. I publicly post my phone number, I post my email, I post all these different social medias. And while I'm not always perfect in
Mhm.
responding, I try to be available and I try to, and more importantly, I try to hear out what people are saying. I may not always agree with what's being said, but it is my job to hear you out, and it's my job to make sure your concerns are listened to respectfully. And I think the last word there, respectfully, is an incredibly important thing that I worry is going away in our society. I mean, you look at a lot of different officials. I mean, and this is true on both sides of the aisle. Is we are getting very um, tense with each other and
Mhm.
we're kind of pushing back on each other and it's like I don't think there is a concern that's a Republican or a Democratic concern. I think there are concerns, and I think as let's say somebody brings something to me that I may not agree with, or if they bring something to, I'll start there. If they don't, if it's a concern I don't agree with, I think it's my responsibility to listen and try to understand where you're coming from, and then say, well, this is kind of my perspective on it, and going from there. And I think that's a big thing is conversations we can have with our elected officials, I think are integral to our society. And I think then further, if something is brought up that isn't true, or may have been misheard or misinformed, I think as public officials, I think it's our goal to say, well, I understand why you may be concerned about this. This is what's actually going on, or this is why this thing is
Mhm.
happening. And I think that's a big thing that we need to make sure that we're maintaining in our democratic society is trust of each other, trust of our elected officials. And 'cause if you can't trust that you are going to be heard, or it can't be trusted that you're able to have these peaceful conversations and hear each other out, then it's it's a show that there is an erosion of that democratic society. And I think it's something that we need to be weary of. Like I said, like things have been told to me that I may not have or that I may not have agreed with, or that I feel may take the schools in the wrong direction. But at the end of the day, I'm still going to hear them out, and I'm still going to
Mhm.
have these conversations, and we're still going to talk.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of where I'm standing on when can we voice our concerns? And I think the time is always.
Mhm.
And you asked about concerns with vulnerable populations. Euclid very proudly has autism units. We educate autistic children, and it's something that I'm very proud of our schools with. But again, when we're talking about defunding, or we're not, I guess this is kind of my issue currently. I mentioned my disagreements with the state and the federal governments is I think sometimes decisions are made that have not been clearly thought through. Um, and I think that's a thing that as citizens is our role to make sure that we are holding elected officials accountable to make intelligent decisions. I may not always say agree. I'm going to use the governor as an example. I may not always agree with Governor Mike DeWine on the decisions he makes. And I have ways of vocalizing that, and I have ways of doing that, but I will give credit to the governor here. I can trust that he is thinking about things intelligently. And I can trust that he is using experience to make decisions, and I may not always believe they're the correct decisions, and I may respond accordingly, and that's my right, just as it is his right to make those decisions. But I think that we need to make sure that we're going through and thinking through decisions. Um,
Mhm.
and when we're making decisions with the budget that may affect um, students who have autism, who may be part of the LGBTQ community, or as you said, maybe learning English, I think we need to remember those populations, and remember more importantly that they are people. And that's the thing that I have trouble with the kind of current rhetoric that goes on is that it feels as though we are targeting, gay or trans students as if they are not people.
Mhm.
And I think that's something we need to remember. And I think we need to make sure that we need to be treating these people with
Mhm.
respect. Um, and so when we're talking about these things, I think we need to uh, make sure that we're talking to our elected officials and saying, these are our concerns. This is the
Mhm.
thing I'm worried about. And it's not like I'm not saying that it's like, oh, I support like this because there's this notion of this radical gender ideology. And personally, I have not really spoken with anyone that really believes this radical idea that we need to be transing the kids, or, that we're showing them these books that are making them gay or anything like
Mhm.
that. And it's coming like just like how these children are people too, our elected officials are also people, and
Mhm.
they are subject to fears, and they are subject to having wrong ideas. And that's why, again, I think it's important that we allow ourselves to have heart-to-heart conversations and say, you know, if you're making decisions on trans issues, I think an important thing to ask is, are you familiar with this thing? And not saying it in a, oh, are you doing this? Like, are you really thinking about doing this? Not trying to be disrespectful, but trying to say, hey, look, I really would appreciate if you considered, this perspective that you might not hold, and maybe consider that the perspective you're coming at this is one that's misinformed. Um, you know, I don't think that, this transgendered people are switching their genders because they're mentally ill. That's not, I think there is a science behind it. And I think sometimes you don't understand it. Just like any other issue, I don't think you necessarily are always able to understand it until you experience knowing somebody that is going through it. And I think that's why conversations are useful. And I think that talking to your elected officials and saying, look, this is the thing I'd like you to consider, and the plus side of living in a democratic society is that if we do not feel that our elected officials are listening to us on this, you can say, I don't want to vote for you. I'd like somebody else, or maybe even yourself, to run and say, I'm presenting in an alternative case. And it's just like we need to make sure we're treating all people with respect, and we need to make sure that we're hearing them out. We need to understand them. We need to understand each other. And I think that's a really important thing in dealing with important decision making.
And as always, you bring so many beautiful, wonderful, intelligent layers to the conversation. And I want to say thank you for extending a little bit of open public awareness to elected officials, right? I love that you extend us grace because we are people too. And although you love to make yourself available, you can't always be available, or you do miss things on occasion, but you are that steady person who's willing to listen even to oppositional perspectives in the spirit of trying to connect with your community and to serve them. Um, I do want to touch on something that you said that, you alluded to an individualized education plan as it relates to your high student base of people living with the diagnosis of autism. And I want to touch on how some of this funding can impact Title I funding, special education funding, and then the expansion of these vouchers and how those dollars can come out of the public domain and into the private schools where public schools, they lose students, they lose the funding, and then private schools, they're able to cherry pick their students and they're able to churn away others. So if this continues down the path that it feels very much, again, addressing that these are reasonable concerns and fears, they're not irrational, but it looks like it's going down a path in all school districts where it's going to be unsustainable if we don't, as a community, stand up and insist. If it goes down that path where public schools are decimated or close to being decimated or no longer viable resources for educational opportunities, what happens to those folks who depend on IEPs or they depend on special education to meet their needs? Where do they go?
Right. And this is the thing too, I was kind of just touching on where it's like we need to make sure we're understanding people. We need to make sure we're
Mhm.
understanding people's needs. And I think a thing, because talking about the influence of Trump is um I feel like there's a rising villainization of people with special needs.
Mhm.
And I, one second, sorry, I'm getting a little technical difficulties.
Sure.
Um, I think that um, we need to be careful that we're making sure that we're remembering that these are people. I mean, like,
Mhm.
just because somebody has more needs or needs more assistance in one way or another, it does not make them any lesser. I spoke on
Mhm.
this recently at a Euclid school board meeting, but I've been friends with people who have autism, and I've had family who are on the spectrum as well, and they aren't any less than you or I, and there is such a wide range of what autism and special needs means. And if we aren't careful, we're gonna like wipe away the ability to get those people assistance that they need.
Mhm.
And then that means that they aren't able to live as fulfilled lives as they might otherwise be able to with the assistance they need. And it's just, it saddens me to think about that. And I just want to make sure that we are able to support everyone in our communities and make sure that everybody is
Mhm.
getting the things that they need to live a fulfilling life.
Yes, agreed. And there is an area that we didn't touch on yet, and I do want to touch on it. And I realize that SB1, we have a citizens-led initiative to attempt to repeal SB1, which we know has passed, and it involves higher education. Um, but it does involve setting a standard for just allowing teachers to strike when they feel that their contracts are being breached or when their compensation or treatment is not fair. And that impact largely on teachers' unions. And so when that attack in Ohio or that attack that can trickle down federally, especially with Trump's big, beautiful bill and some of those details that involve unions and teachers' unions and public education um, in this era of the Trump's federal priorities and how they are, how does that affect teacher recruitment and retention and morale in your city of Euclid? And have has Euclid school systems have they suffered through teacher shortages or the inability to attract in talent that wants to be part of this opportunity for your students?
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up in a union household. Like I mentioned, my father was a firefighter, a union firefighter. And I think unions are a real boon of our society in making sure that people are given the protections they need and they deserve in uh just in their place of work. I mean, when you're going about your life, you have your personal life, but you have your work life, and you want to make sure that you're being treated fairly at both.
Mhm.
And so unions are a great way of making sure that you are treated fairly at your workplace. And so when you're talking about eroding, teachers' unions and the like, I think it's a real turn off for people that want to go into these professions. And so, it's if we are eroding people's abilities to live fulfilling, productive lives in Ohio, we are essentially telling them we don't want you here. Part of the reason I got politically involved in the beginning was back in 2011. I mentioned my dad. Was he voted and he paid attention, he did all this sort of stuff, but he was never the sort to be like going out to like all these political events. He was always very traditional in the sense of not wanting political yard signs and only having school levies. But I remember one time in 2011, my dad got very strongly political about a certain issue, and I very specifically remember him having this yard sign and even having a shirt, a big golden shirt, and it said "Repeal Senate Bill 5." And I remember talking to my dad about what that was, and I mean that just show in it if for those that are unfamiliar, Senate Bill 5 was this initiative to get rid of public sector unions, teachers, fire, EMS, and so on and so forth. And and it was successfully repealed. And I think that kind of shows that the working people of Ohio w want to remain here and they want to be able to continue living fulfilling lives here. And so, again, the erosion of unions, both from the Trump administration and from state government, or the attempts at state government, it just shows that, it's kind of just this. push down of against the public desire to live fulfilling lives. And I think it's something we should be concerned about because, there's the arguments with against unions of, well, what do we need them for nowadays? Like, we already got all these protections and we have these benefits and we have XYZ things. But it's a thing that I think we can especially take away now from the Trump administration is just because we have something now does not mean it is always going to be there. And so having safeguards to ensure that we are respected is, I think, is a necessity. I think it's a necessity. And so I think we need to be very weary of, the erosion of these safeguards.
Agreed, 100%. And the maintenance, not only the continued progress that's necessary to facilitate what we touched on previously, that work-life balance and life liberty and the pursuit of happiness, but the maintenance of what was hard fought by the people whose shoulders we stand on today and to the benefits that we realize today. It is about the maintenance of those efforts.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly.
100%. So I think we're almost coming up on time. I did not get any questions in the chat. If anyone on the call does have a question, please put it in the chat now before we close. But I do want to ask you, moving forward, um, how could regular everyday citizens that we represent as elected officials, how could they get more involved to help protect some of these systems and these organizations that help to produce this opportunity for our children?
And that's a great question. And I think especially in the times we live in, it's a very pertinent question. Um, I mean, I got involved personally because of these same reasons. I wanted to, know what was going on. I wanted to be able to have my voice heard. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. I mean, if like it was mentioned in the beginning, I'm a part of a youth organization, the Future Forward Alliance, and part of what we're trying to build there is, community building. We're trying to, go out and make sure people are aware of what's going on and trying to help build better communities. And so, you can join organizations like that, you can attend meetings like that. And in the more like government-centric ways, you can also go to your city council meetings, you can go to your school board meetings. I mean, you can even attend hearings at the state capitol if you really want. I mean, even from there, like, in my experience, a lot of local officials are more than happy to take your call too, or even if you just send them an email, they're happy to hear you out. They're happy to talk to you. And so you can do that. You can make sure you're staying in touch. You can do the same with your state level officials too. I mean, you can send in a letter or a call or whatever to your state senators, your state representatives. You can even do that for the governor if you so want. And if you feel that you're not being listened to, anybody can run for office. I think that's really important for people to know is you don't have to be like born into a political family. You don't have to be like the person that's at every city council meeting. I know I just said like that's a good way to stay in touch and stay involved is by going to those meetings. But like, if you're like, oh man, I've only gone to like one or two, but I try to keep up from home, you're more than able to still do this. Like, we live in a democratic society, and that means that people like you and me can do extraordinary things. I mean, I had just graduated from my undergraduate when I was a year removed from that when I decided to run for office. And I did it because I wanted to give back to my community. And, if somebody like me can do that, then it's like anybody can do that. And I think that's a very powerful thing. And I think it's a very powerful thing to remember. And, if you don't want to run for office too, like if you don't want to if you don't want to be the face on the stage, I understand that too.
Mhm.
And there's still ways you can help out with other people you believe in. And all you have to do is just, reach out. And I think that's a very powerful thing in our society is being able to just reach out to each other. And I think it's a very beautiful thing. And I think it's a thing we have to make sure doesn't go away.
I love your message of community and of connection and empowerment. I love how you gave a dynamic example of different opportunities of involvement, such as something on a more extreme end, but very attainable end of running for office, to attending meetings, to going to the Capitol while they're in session or in committee. You could even give testimony while they're in committee if you submit it to the chair ahead of time. I love being at the state capitol and being part of the process, even just as a fly on the wall or someone who would give testimony to something that I feel passionate about. But they also have websites. So the state has a website where you could follow legislation and get email updates on legislation you're tracking. Um, all the federal entities have that in the same regard. And then coming down to the county and local entities, the majority of them have live streams where you could watch. If you're not able to come in person, you could watch or look at their archived meetings on YouTube so that you can have a part in that civic engagement and involvement. I do love how you also meet people who don't want to do any of those things or can't do any of those things. They can get involved through convenient apps like the Five Calls app. They could get involved in a group who offers postcard writing or letter writing initiatives. And you could also go to your local papers, like cleveland.com, for example, or even Scene Magazine for some of the younger or middle-aged to younger generation who rely on that. And you could post letters to the editor about areas that you're passionate about. So I think that is a fantastic way of representing and involving your community. I love that you are so involved and willing to engage in a nonpartisan way, by the way, which,
Mhm.
you know, the Lady Liberty League, we do pride ourselves on a nonpartisan inclusion to the people who are listening or want to be part of this league and presenting ideas in good faith and entertaining and engaging oppositional or dissenting ideology so that we can have that connection. So
Absolutely. And that's
yeah.
kind of a thing I want to add on too that I didn't really make full force here. But if there's something that you feel can be done in your community and you don't think there's a group already addressing it, there's nothing to stop you from forming your own. Get a group of friends, get, family, do whatever, and you can make something. I just want to make a kind of quick shout out here because obviously like gun violence is a big issue.
Mhm.
And three activists in Euclid, Tanika Hill, Pam Turos and Emily Holliday formed an organization here in Euclid, the Hope Task Force, which is hoping to, advance the cause for gun control and, stop gun violence. So it's like, as long as you have an idea and people to support it, you as a citizen can do anything. And if you, I just attended one of those meetings for a brief period of time. I had other commitments, but for the time I was there, it's like there was real energy at that
Mhm.
meeting. And it's just, and again, like it wasn't a partisan thing. It's not a political thing, really. I
Mhm.
mean, like, I guess you could say anything's political, but like it was founded to try to address something, a real problem in society, and anyone can do that. And that's the really beautiful part of our society. And so if you feel that something isn't being addressed, you can be the change you want to see.
And that's representative of liberty in a free society. It is these citizen-led initiatives like Hope Task Force that recognizes a need, a fundamental need for safety or increase in safety. And like you said, you grab yourself and a few of your friends and you gather and you start creating a structure. It's kind of like flying the plane as you build it sometimes. But those
Hmm.
efforts are oftentimes the best efforts because they come from a sincere, recognized, shared need. So I thank you so much for coming on. I thank everybody who joined us today and anyone who listens beyond today. And we look forward to our next speaker in 2 weeks. And School Board Member Botzki, you are welcome anytime. Thank you.
I will absolutely take you up on that. And again, thank you so much for inviting me here today. It was a real joy and pleasure to speak.
Of course, we appreciate your experience and your intellect.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a great day.